Today I would like to take you, I have to switch it on, to the south of Italy, and more precisely to the second half of the second millennium in the south of Italy. And this is just to give you a little idea on the state of research that we have when we want to go into the problems of the Bronze Age in the south of Italy. I have marked here long years, excavation resting several years, excavations that are or have been executed as research excavations rather than rescue excavations. So in Apulia, you have the settlement site of Roccavecchia, maybe the most important Bronze Age excavation in the south of Italy. You have the necropolis of Trinitapoli, a burial cave, a so-called hypogeum. Another settlement, the Coppa Nevigata, so these are excavations by the Universities of Lecce, Rome and Foggia. To the west, you have in the west of Apulia, the site of Porto Perone, excavated in the 1960s. Termidito in the 1970s, both are settlements. And then maybe the most famous settlement excavations, because they have been published to a large extent, Brogli di Trebisace and Torre Bondillo's excavations by the Lab Sapienza of Rome. Of course, Vivara, part of the island of Procida, but a small promontory with three settlement sites of the Bronze Age, mainly Middle Bronze Age. And of course, a whole couple of sites, like 5 sites on the archipelago of the Aeolian Islands, excavations by the famous archaeologist Luigi Bano-Bobrea, which you know, of course, also from his Greek excavations in Poliochni. And finally, on Sicily, the excavation of Thapsos, started by Paolo Orsi, and then continued by Vonza, but it's still not finished. I mean, there are large extents to be excavated, as nearly in all of those settlements. But as you realize from that map, there are huge gaps, of course, in our knowledge in this entire region, and especially so in the south of Calabria, which is in fact the region where the name of Italy originates. I mean, according to the Greek mythology, it is told that there was a hero called Italos, and then there are other stories telling that Heracles was searching for a little bovine, a little calf, which was in vitellum in Latin, and then the whole landscape would take the name by this little calf. So this is the first Italy, so to speak, in the mythology. Well, I'll take you to one region inside that larger area, which is this little, or not so little, promontory. You can see here the scale of the Poro Peninsula, or peninsula of Tropea, in the modern province of Vibo Valentia. And we are looking at the site of Punta di Zambrone, where I have been fortunate enough to have a very nice cooperation with a colleague from the University of Napoli, Federico II, Professor Marco Pacciarelli, who suggested to me to do a joint excavation there, because there is a site, he told me, where we have a lot of trans-Mediterranean contacts. And in fact, it's a region where he was, since decades, executing survey work together with local people interested in archaeology, but not being archaeologists, and he educated them how to spot and document sites and collect material. And this has been a very fruitful collaboration that enabled them to make a whole mapping of sites of various periods. You see now here the recent Bronze Age sites in that region. And so to have a very nice overview over the development of the settlement system in that region. So we have had already a background of survey knowledge for the site we were excavating. And here this high plain of Poro is, as you see, higher than 500 meters above sea level. So and as you see the scale, it raises really quickly in terraces from the sea level to this high level, which at the highest points is like 600 meters above sea level. And when you are there and you have a good view, you can see the Etna mountain smoking, and you have a good view to Sicily, you have a good view to the Aeolian Islands, and then also to the opposite coast versus the Bay of Naples. But of course you can't see until Campania, but you have a very good strategic view from all that region, and not only from the high plain but also from the coast itself. So and inside this region, this site of Punta di Zambrone was the only one giving material from the Aegean. So he conducted the first excavation, Pacciari conducted the first excavation in 1994, and demonstrated by that in the recent Bronze Age, that is the 13th and the 14th century, no, the end of the 14th century, the 13th century, and the first half of the 12th century, there is presence of Mycenaean pottery. So and that was the reason to choose this site. Very recently this year we have had documentation of the Cape by a drone from, with a team from the University of Dresden, and but the model is not yet finally calculated, but you can see like some of those aerial photographs. And maybe there was also something like a harbor bay. Nowadays you see the beaches are going like straight, at least the southern beach. The northern one is a very small bay, but the southern beach is like a straight one. But it seems that there has been a different situation in antiquity. We are still doing collaboration with the geologists from the University of Naples. It seems that there has been a harbor bay which was closed naturally by this thing, which is a reef now underwater, but it should have been slightly outside the water, and then there was the bay like this. And we are preparing to make a drill in the bay to verify that. But we have done, or they have done, the team under Paola Romano, seismic measurements that should give good indication that there has been a bay. So it would not be the situation as you see it now. This is the mapping of the site, and we did a 3 years project with 3 campaigns and excavated 3 different areas, because it was targeted by a geomagnetic survey that has been done by Eastern Atlas, a team from Berlin, and you will see the picture in a minute. We focused on an anomaly that turned out to be the fortification ditch of the site, and on one area inside the fortification, where some settlement layers are preserved. Unfortunately, recent terracing has destroyed the recent Bronze Age levels inside this fortification, and then there was plowing in the 1950s or 60s. We couldn't exactly find out, but that was quite disturbing to the strata. But nevertheless, we have had good records from the very early Bronze Age here in Area D. This is what I don't show today, and of the recent Bronze Age in these 2 areas. The area enclosed or protected by the fortification is like 1.1 hectare in size, but it must have been considerably larger because this granite backrock is eroding very fast. This seems to be a contradiction. If you hear granite, you think like of the fantastic obelisks from Egypt, like standing upright after being stolen from Egypt in Rome or in Paris and resisting all the pollution. But this granite here would not resist because it's very, very fragile. You can nearly cut it with a knife. So it's really eroding quickly away. So it must have been a considerably bigger promontory before. It's very steep on its slopes, so it offers a natural protection, and so the site had to be protected basically towards the hinterland. A short overview of the development as we could document it. We have the earliest layer directly on bedrock, which is the very early Early Bronze Age, an facies, a cultural group so far unknown, which has strong links to Sicily, dated by radiocarbon around 2000 BCE. And then a second Early Bronze Age phase of the 18th, 17th century. Then, if there is a hiatus, we don't know, because as I told you, the strata on top of the Early Bronze Age are gone. But we have some pottery of the Middle Bronze Age, so maybe there was no hiatus in the end. And then we have good documentation for the recent Bronze Age. So the recent Bronze Age is the phase that would be roughly parallel with late Helladic, late Minoan 3b, and the first part of 3c until late Helladic 3c advanced. But this is at the end of recent Bronze Age. 2 is late Helladic, 3c advanced. Our site is abandoned earlier, you will see. Abandoned finally. This was then the good luck we had. There is no recent settlement activity until the 20th century. Even if we have this disturbance of the upper strata by the plowing, it did not cause admixture of younger material. This is the picture of the geomagnetic prospection, and this is the long anomaly of the fortification ditch. This is parallel to that another structure of the early Bronze Age, and this one is of the recent Bronze Age, more than 80 meters long and like 4.5 meters wide in the upper parts. We have two different sorts of stratigraphy in this ditch. We have a fill with granitic and clay material in area B, and by contrast with ashes in the area C. This is the section in area B. You note this particular hollowing, which might indicate that there was water flowing in this ditch. The sediments also give this impression that was excavating below with the little waves this granite bedrock, and as I told you, it is very fragile. This granite erodes easily. You get several levels of sediments of more sandy or more clay texture after the cutting of the ditch, and then at some point there is a collapse of a structure that was standing here at right at the edge of the ditch. A little bit further to the south, we found some stones in situ, so there was a defensive wall right at the edge of the ditch. And this thing must have had quite a good effect of protection. I remind you that the fortification ditch, as it is here in this size and this depth, is quite closely comparable to the one protecting the lower city of Troy. It's not so so provincial, let's say, in its size. You find the protection ditch also at Roccavecchia, the site I have mentioned before, which is smaller than that. It's just 2 meters wide, also hewn from the rock. In the end, after the collapse of the wall, you get more sedimentation and then an infill of a packet of homogeneous sediments that is closing the ditch, and there we have material of the recent Bronze Age, 2 of the last phase of the settlement. And finally the plowing, you can see those plow marks. In area C, as I said, the stratigraphy is slightly different. This is now the view towards the south. Before we had the view towards the north, so now the erosion of the water is at the other side, of course, but it's always in the east. We have sedimentation. We have first the cutting of the ditch, the sedimentation, and then a first kind of collapse of parts of the wall. And then it seems that they did some re-excavating of the fill of the ditch. They made a little channel, it seems, which was then filled again by sediments, partly of ash. And finally, the wall collapses, this is stones in a matrix of clay, limey sediments, and on top of that is the final collapse of the wall together with ash. It's a huge package of ash, like it must have been originally like at least 1 meter high or deep. We have indications that a part, even in that part, part of the surface is gone by the modern terracing. And inside this debris of the collapsed wall, we find some stones that have worked surfaces that meet in right angles, at like 3 surfaces or 2 surfaces that seem to be worked, which is a very rare thing in construction in the south of Italy. The only example I know of the Bronze Age which has really squared stones is the fortification of Roccavecchia in its recent Bronze Age phase, and only in its recent Bronze Age phase. Yeah, there you have really squared stones that were set up in a nice, like, isodomic in Vigolette masonry, but then covered with a lime plaster so you wouldn't even see it. But otherwise, they worked with unworked stones in house construction and in construction of fortifications. The ashes are not result of accumulation over time. You cannot think of like people throwing their waste from the hearth fire periodically into the ditch, because what we are missing is intermediate levels between the ash levels of sand or clay that you would inevitably have if you had rainfall coming in, and it is raining. I mean, at least today, okay, even if the climate was different, it would rain sometimes. So for sure, it's not representing a process of a year also. It's a short process of fill. And this is confirmed by the fact that we find joining sherds between the lowest ash levels and the very highest ones. So in fact, the ashes must have accumulated perhaps inside the settlement, perhaps outside, we cannot know that, before, and have then been heaped intentionally into that ditch when the ditch had to be finally closed, when somebody wanted this ditch to be out of function for sure. So, of course, there can be 2 hypotheses. Either it's the population itself who wanted to leave and wanted to prevent the enemy using the settlement as a stronghold for themselves, or by contrast, the enemy wanted to make sure that the settlement they had destroyed will not be reoccupied and defended again by the population. It was an intentional thing. There's the plow marks in the end. It was an intentional thing because we have a situation of deposition on top of the collapsed wall and below the ashes. You will see in a minute. But now to give you just an impression of the ashes, it's really fine gray ashes we were digging there. The event of deposition has been a cup, not directly in the section, therefore it's not marked in the section, it has been a meter to the south. A cup, the only whole vessel that we found. It is placed to the side, leaning on one of its sides, enclosed by potsherds and stones, and totally intact. It had only a crack. And then it was directly covered by the ashes. It is resting on top of the debris of the wall and covered by the lowest layer of ashes. We have taken a sample for residue analysis, but it is not yet done, this residue analysis. We are waiting for it. So and this is the cup, how it looks like. It's a recent Bronze Age cup, but not one of the very typical ones. Handmade pottery, burnished, as is usual the case in that cultural facies. Yeah, now to the local cultural material. We have the pottery, as always in the south of Italy in that time, is made by hand. It can have a rather fine texture, but it would still be coarse in terms of Aegean pottery. Perhaps not so much in terms of some of the Minoan wares, but in terms of Mycenaean wares it would be coarse still. But this would be the tableware, like cups and bowls. Very typical are those appendixes on those protomes on the handles. Horned, protomes in various shape. And this kind of pottery, this kind of typological group is called sub-Apennine. It's a terminus coined by Peroni in the 1950s for a phenomenon that it has spread like from the end of the 14th century throughout the Italian peninsula, from the Po down to Reggio Calabria and even to the northeast of Sicily, and replacing the local cultural group of the Middle Bronze Age throughout Italy. There are some local divergences in the sub-Apennine style in the various regions. For example, in our regions, it is these so-called ansa a volute, so voluted handles, although they are no real volutes, it's not curling in, but it's these ears that they are called volute, for open bowls, typical for the Aeolian Islands and for southern Calabria. Whereas these kinds of horned handles, you can find the same shirt in the Emilia, let's say. That's a real strong phenomenon, and during that time, for the first time also, the cremation rite is spreading throughout large parts of Italy, though not in our region, and basically in our region and lots of Calabria, we don't know any burials from the period. This is still a problem. So, kind of cultural unification, let's say, that brings about the fading of the local Middle Bronze Age cultures. In our case, it would have been the Thapsos Milacese facies, so the cultural group linking the Aeolian Islands, the south of Calabria, and eastern Sicily with the famous site of Thapsos. This was the preceding one in the 14th century. Unfortunately, we don't have layers of that period, so we cannot, at our site, see how this change looks like. What was the historical phenomenon seeing that change? Okay, then we have, of course, courseware pottery, whole mouth jars, as the Americans call that kind of type, with plastic bands underneath the rim, either with finger digit or plain bands. And this kind of pottery makes up like 90% or even more of the pottery in that site. So what we have in terms of Aegean pottery is a tiny, tiny minority. Going further, we wanted, of course, look at the subsistence, the economy of the site. So we had a team of archaeologists working with that on site, and now in Vienna with those bone materials that we are allowed to export. And we have to say, Pacciarelli and I, we are extremely grateful to the Soprintendenza and Mrs. Bonomi, who was really very generous in giving us the permits to sample, to export, to re-import. It was really very facilitating for our work. We are extremely grateful, and we have had both of us, we have had quite different experiences, either in other countries or in Italy, and this was really a favorite situation, I have to say. Okay, our zoologists tell us that in general, we have an economy based almost on equal percentages on bovines, cattle, sheep and goat. That is always difficult to tell apart for the geologists, and pigs. And then we have a little bit of game, wild animals, a little bit of horse, small ones, but they are there, and dogs. Something not clear? Game, yeah, wild animals. So we have cervos, lafos, so the red deer, and we have the ducks, badgers, and we have aquila. We have eagles, 2 eagles, a very strange thing. Well, okay, these are the fancy things that don't really play a role in the economy. There is a change in time. In the early Bronze Age, we have this equal occurrence of the 3 main meat and milk deliverers. But, no, in the recent Bronze Age, sorry. In the early Bronze Age, however, here down, we have a predominance of cattle. And this fits very well with the result of Alessia Dauria, who is a master's student at the University of Naples, who is telling us that the analysis of the charred wood samples that we get from flotation shows a much more reduced forest in the early Bronze Age and more forest indicators in the recent Bronze Age. And of course, when you have a cattle-based economy, you need to have open areas for where the cattle can graze, where they can feed. So this goes together with this. Now, we did also botanic sampling, quite intensive with flotation of all settlement areas, and we find a really conservative economy, we have to say. This is for the cereals. There's not a big development from the early Bronze Age to the recent Bronze Age. The main wheat species is emmer. There's very few einkorn only. And we have barley present, but to a small extent, as you can see. And the only thing that is new in the recent Bronze Age is the millet, broom corn millet. Millet, we have said in French, no? Millet? Millet, okay. Milium panico miliaceum, milio in Italiano, which is a thing that arrives to Greece also in the second half of the second millennium and also to Italy. It comes, our botanists tell us it comes from China in the end, but it comes through the Mediterranean in that time. What we don't have is fig and olive. I mean, we have to keep that in mind because we have a lot of contact to the Eastern Mediterranean, but there was no olive pits present in the archaeobotanical material. It's strange because Alessia Dauria is telling us that in the charcoal there is olive. There's quite a lot of olive wood, but we don't have the pips of the olives. So, and it is not clear if the olive was really growing as a wild tree predominantly there in that landscape. Today it is not. Now it's a question of the reconstruction of climate, and it is difficult. We have very few pollen data from the region. We are doing a pollen core on the Poro High Plain. We are still expecting to happen this with our collaborators in December, and we hope to find out there more about that. If the olives were wild, they would have been used as building material. For example, in Roccavecchia, this is proven because part of the fortification, the wooden elements of the Middle Bronze Age fortifications are partly made of olive wood because it's a very hard wood and it's a wood very resistant to decay in terms of when it is moisture, when it's wet, it doesn't rot so easily as other wood does. And it's also very good firewood. So maybe this is the reason. And to suppose that it was not the exploitation of the oil would go together also with the fact that we don't have pitoi in our material. You do get pitoi from the recent Bronze Age 2 onwards in the north of Calabria. In Broglio di Trevisace it is attested, and then it becomes very common in the final Bronze Age. And for example, in Roccavecchia you get these pitoi that are like that high. And unfortunately, there has not been done a lot of analysis of residues, but it seems that at least partially these pitoi were used to store olive oil. Not olive oil has not been possible to detect oil, but Rottländer did in Berlin, who did an analysis for Peroni years ago, he said he found oil in the pitoi of Broglio, but of the final Bronze Age, 100 years younger than ours. And when you look carefully at the stratigraphical contexts of the earliest pitoi of recent Bronze Age 2, it seems that they are from the end of the recent Bronze Age 2, from the part that is contemporary with late Halladic 3C advanced, and not from the part that is contemporary with late Halladic 3C early. So we think we can we get here the last phase before this evolving Pitos storage culture and the change in economy that can be detected in several South Italian sites. And that finally in the final Bronze Age in the Sybaritis leads to dispersed storerooms, not even concentrated one, but dispersed on the landscape. The Dutch colleagues found that where you have at various locations storerooms with pitoi in them. It's a very, very strange phenomenon. We are before that. So that could be the reason why we were missing the pitoi and the olives. So the botanists did like reconstruction. This is the milieu. It's not a real reconstruction. It's like a bad photomontage, but just to show you, this is the einkorn and the millet, the millet. So, coming to the Aegean stuff. As I told you, we have the ash layers that were very good for the preservation of the materials. The bones are well preserved, the pottery is well preserved, in contrast to the layers that are predominantly characterized by the granitic created soil. So where the pottery is very degraded, it has become soft because it's a very acid milieu, and the surface and the paint is nearly gone. In the ashes, it's well preserved, and some sherds join between the lowest levels and the highest levels. Just one example. Then we have 3C early pottery in the lowest levels, and 3B also somewhere higher up. This is just one example to tell you that this thing again is not a stratigraphy that builds up over a long period of time, but it is a secondary deposition. The 14C dates confirm that. The dates from the material on the bottom of the ditch, where unfortunately we don't have datable pottery, it's very eroded, rounded sherds. The C14 dates give us the same range, more or less, a little bit earlier than the contexts of the ashes. So in fact, this ditch has been in use for a very short time, but you can't take these dates literally because the calibration curve of the 14th and 13th century is very, very horizontal. It's not steep. You can't get a really good calibration. The Aegean material is very diverse. We have, on the one hand, pottery, Mycenaean and Minoan in type. We have a whole series of faience beads of different Aegean types, but only simple types. Of course, no relief beads, but quite a lot of them, and especially the very small ones, like 2 millimeters or 3 millimeters in diameter, and we get them, of course, from the flotation samples. So that might be maybe an explanation why in other settlements in the south of Italy we don't have them, because it is rare that they did an extensive program of flotation. We have had one glassy faience bead, which is not very spectacular if you look at it. Even it is so well preserved, that the material is well preserved, the surface is eroded, but the material seems even modern. And I had my doubts when we found it, because it was in the topmost layer, and there was a guy from Pakistan selling beads to the tourists, and I was like, yeah, well, but we did an analysis. Sonia Conte from Modena did an analysis of trace elements together with Gratus from Lyon, and they found out that it's a chemical pattern that occurs rarely, but it does occur in Italy in bead types of Aegean type. And the Aegean, unfortunately, the analysis, the published analysis, did not go to that detail that we could pinpoint this same chemical pattern, but she can exclude at least an Mesopotamian origin, because in Mesopotamia the same kind of analysis has been done, but they don't find this chemical pattern. So it seems to be an Aegean import. The metal is partly imported, you will see it in a minute, and then we have a statue, a very small one, which we will see in the end of the lecture. Pottery now is representing partly late Palace period phases, Mycenaean Palace period, like a Skyphos A, a deep bowl A with a chevron, and several deep bowls with monochrome decoration. So there are some rumors that this type did exist in the argolith at the end of late Helladic 3B, but it is not really documented in drawings. And in any case, it seems to be a common type only in the beginning of late Helladic 3C. And why I am showing examples of Western Greece, because the clay paste and the paint shows in some cases characteristics that macroscopically seem to point to an origin in Achaia. Closed shapes are present with various types, like alabastra. We have also some stirrup jars, small stirrup jars. Maybe the big jars with restricted neck-handled jars, like big flasks. But The big closed vessels which are present with several shirts are not identifiable to type because they are basically wall shirts. But these are also those examples that really look like Achaean products. And we have a little bit of Minoan stuff, a deep bowl with this alternating arc decoration with some parallels in Crete that are said to be of late Helladic 3B, late Minoan 3B. We have to discuss this with the very Minoan specialists that are present here. It is not monochrome inside, which is I had a hard time to find good parallels for the non-monochrome ones. And one courseware stirrup jar, at least, the closing of the false neck has broken off, but it was present. It is the false neck with an attachment of the handle, and the fine wear shirt, which I did not identify as Minoan in the first place, but the chemical analysis did suggest so. We can discuss that. So we can add another point to the courseware stirrup jar distribution, which is a rare thing in Italy, and some of these dots are in fact not certain courseware stirrup jars. I looked them up in the bibliography and I'm not sure about some of these. So it's one of the rare sites where you get this to the west of Greece. So in Italy you would expect to have local production of Aegean pottery. That's what's going on in many sites. And in fact, in those sites where analysis have been done, it is predominantly local production of Mycenaean or Mycenaeanizing pottery. That is to say, pottery where the wheel throwing technique is applied and the painting is applied, but the shapes are at least partially influenced by the local handmade pottery. And sometimes they're also real, they do reproductions of Mycenaean types or Minoan types from the Aegean. That is what you would expect. In Scoglio del Tonno, you seem to have a situation where you have basically imports, but very few of them have been analyzed. Now, to prove the local production, of course, you need to have a reference group. As we did not find a pottery kiln with the misfired pieces in, we needed to find clay beds, and one of the gentlemen who are like lay archaeologists has shown us clay beds in the vicinity of the site that were really very small clay beds, but he knows all this landscape like his pocket because he was working for Telecom Italia, and he told us, you are searching clay bed? Oh, well, I'll take you to this one, this modern one. And I told him, yeah, this is the fine clay I want. And yes, if you want this one, this is very close to the site. I put up the column of the Telecom like 20 years ago. I know there is such a clay bed. And really, there was one. And we sampled the clay, and we let it analyze by NIA, and these two were chemically absolutely identical. So there was good clay in the vicinity available. But the result is that it was never used for the Mycenaean pottery. What we get instead is by the results of Hans Mommsen, who has probably the largest database of Aegean type pottery all over the eastern and partially central Mediterranean, is a large predominance of Western Peloponnesian fabrics. So Achaia, Elis, and the Ionian Islands, he cannot tell them apart chemically, but he can tell them apart from the argolith, which in earlier analysis that have been done in southern Italy was not possible because they were not working with NAA or they did not have access to the databases. But we can say it is Western Peloponnese. It is not Mycenae Berbati. There is a little bit of Chania, but we have not been, well, Mommsen has not been able to find a match for the courseware stirrup jar. But he doesn't have a lot of samples from all over Crete. He has sampled the courseware stirrup jars from Thebes, and it does not seem to be the Chania pattern. It's something else. Then other imports from Greece not specifiable, 10%. Cyprus, 3%, a closed vessel, just with bands. I wouldn't have known that it is Mycenaean Cypriot. I mean, I have studied Mycenaean pottery in Cyprus or wheel-made painted pottery in Cyprus, but it also did not remind me of anything that I have seen from Engomi, from Ma, from Pila. Mommsen says that the match is with Al-Lassa. in the south of the island. And then we have Italo-Mycenaean pottery, only 10%. In fact, this is Broglie di Trevisace in the north of Calabria, because Mommsen had a collaboration with Jones, who is doing the Broglie di Trevisace material, and he has a group, a chemical group. He can identify that. The local clay ware does not turn up. It did turn up, but in a Roman roof tile from Sicily. So this is probably because the clay beds of southern Calabria and Sicily are chemically, you cannot tell them apart because they're probably part of the same marine deposits okay, you cannot tell apart Corinth and Mycenae, for example. So that may be the reason, not because the Sicilians took the clay from Calabria to make the roof tiles, I think. Well, then we have metals from the ditch, quite a lot of different types, but not well preserved. They are all broken, as is the pottery. Tweezers, pins of various types, no fibulae, which is strange because in this period the fibula is invented. It seems that the men and the women in that region did not like this fashion. They liked another fashion, which is more old-fashioned, like entro virgolette, no? But also with types in northern Italy. And then we have a part of a sword or a dagger, a little ingot, a fishing hook, and we come to these things a little bit more in detail. We did analysis in a collaboration with Matthias Meerhofer and Ernst Bernitzka from the lab in Mannheim. We did lead isotope analysis. Chemical analysis is not very useful because unfortunately our material is totally corroded. There's no real metal left. We can only do the lead isotope. We can do the chemistry, but the chemistry is altered by the corrosion, of course. We find the red rhombs are the bronze artifact, the yellow ones are the lead artifacts. You will see the lead artifacts in a minute. So the basic matches are in this region here, where we have lead and copper ores from Sardinia, but not exactly where the lead and copper ores from Sardinia are. You see rather these blue rhombs. The dark blue ones are objects found in northern Italy, and the light blue ones are slags from Trentino, from the northern Italy, from the southern Alps. And here, these other symbols represent the copper ores from Cyprus. So the bronze ingot, the very tiny bronze ingot, matches the copper ores from Cyprus and does not match any of the Italian copper. This is Toscana, is far away from that, Sardinia is far away, Trentino is far away. We have sampled some Calabrian ore deposits, very few samples up to now, and there is no match with these either. So we think that this at least is, and the other two artifacts are containing copper from Cyprus, in fact. Yeah, this is our sampling, which we did in the terms of another project with Matthias Meerhofer in the Trentino to find the comparative material for the Italian copper. The sword fragment belongs to a type that spread over the eastern Mediterranean in the 13th and 12th century. It's type Cetona in Italy, or now a 2 type A in Kilian Dillmeyer's typology for the Greek swords. So this is part of the large Koine Metallurgica, as the Italians say, or the Urnfield bronzes, as they have also been called, a phenomenon that weaponry and implements reflect a unified typology in large areas of Europe. Then we have these little lead wheels that also gave us the symbol for our dig, which is an implement that is poorly understood. They are published in the PBF series, in the Prähistorische Bronzefunde series, as pinheads, but in fact they have never been found on a shaft, except for one burial in Lipari, which is not mapped here by Matthäus. But they are usually not found as pins, and the tomb in Lipari has it mounted on a shaft, but there are 2 pins that are positioned like this, like pins for the needles for the garments, whereas the other one with this wheel on it is sitting here somewhere. So the real pins for the garments are those which have another head, and this one is separate, it's only one. So probably it has nothing to do with the clothing. It could be a spindle whorl, but it is very heavy, of course, if it's of lead. Usually the things are of bronze. These are of bronze, the other ones that you see here on the map. These are of lead, and there's maybe one from Scoglio from Porto Perone, which could be of lead, but it's published as tin, but it's probably lead. But the type is the same. So even if they are of bronze, they are quite heavy. They should be only usable, if they are spindle whorls, they should be usable only for plant fibers also. It's an enigma. In Greece, similar wheels are used to stamp the pitoi in the post-Palatial area, but they don't do that in Italy. In Greece, though, we find a mold for such a wheel in the very last level of the Mini, of the so-called reoccupation of the early post-Palatial period that is exactly contemporaneous with ours. And when we go to the lead isotopes, we find that this one is right in the middle of the field of Laurion, of the Laurion lead, and the other one is compatible with various lead deposits in the Aegean, Thassos and Euboea, which, however, are superposed to each other, so we can't tell them apart. The lead of northern Italy, the Trentino, would be in this region again. I haven't plotted the lead ingot from Fratesina, which we sampled, but believe me, you can tell this apart. So this lead is definitely from the Aegean. Now it's a strange thing because the type is coming from Italy. It is present in the Aegean, but with a few examples only. But these things contain metal from the Aegean. So either we have an import of lead to southern Italy, or we have people having contact with people living in the Aegean and producing Italian type objects in the Aegean and then re-importing them to Italy. The fish hook. The fish hook at first sight is a thing, yeah, okay, you say the fish hook is fish hook, it's always the same, like how you do it. But it isn't so. If you look at the various types that are present in the second half of the second millennium, you have, you have some which have this loop, the occhiello. And you have others which have a hammered head, flat. Or you have others which have no real head at all. So when you think it's also difficult how can you tie the rope on it, but it is possible. So in Cyprus, for example, you find basically those which are like this. In the Aegean, these ones are typical. In the Balkans, in the Carpathian Basin, these ones are typical. In the Swiss lakes, where you have dozens and dozens of them, all the types are typical. There is no differentiation whatsoever. In Italy, in the south, these ones seem to be typical. And when you go to the Aegean and look at those few sites that have the one with the loop, it's one of Maglia, very, very late context, House Epsilon, Ialissos, a tomb that contained late Atlantic 3A, late Atlantic 3C pottery, Kinos, Pyrgos Libanaton, late Atlantic 3C context, and again, Tychos Dimeon. So, Punta di Zambrone, Tychos Dimeon. This is the region where the pottery comes from. Tychos Dimeon is a castle, a citadel, approximately of the size of Punta di Zambrone, which is located on Cap Araxos. It's in fact the first cape you see when you come from Italy by boat to the Peloponnese. It's a Mycenaean acropolis built in the later stages of late Atlantic 3B, but still there should be done a real sounding at the wall to date it properly. And at Tychos Dimeon, interestingly enough, we have a lot of objects of metal that are Italian type objects. Pertosa dagger, a fibula, a fishing hook like ours, and a lead wheel like ours. I can tell you that these two, the fibula and the dagger, are containing Cypriot copper. We did analysis of them, so they are produced in Greece according to an Italian model, because this Cypriot copper, except our site, does not seem to have been imported to Italy to make objects in Italy. And in Tychos Dimeon we have handmade pottery of Italian type. You remember these horn handles that we have had? You remember these pots, the whole mouth jars with the rope decoration? You have that here. So it really seems to be one of those sites that had very intense contacts to Italy. And on the various levels we see this contact in the same period, the post-glacial period, when the palace system has broken down. And that was coming and going in a very intense way. This pottery, Italian type pottery, you find all over Greece in this time, but even as far as Cyprus and as the Akka plain in Syria. In Syria we find the same carinated cups that we find in Punta di Zambrona at the site of Tel Ara in the Lebanon, and in Tel Kazel we don't find the cups, but we find the whole mouth jars in the same way as we find them in Tiryns at the same time. And then we find another strange object. It was identified because it was found in the ashes. In this very ashy material, this popped up, and the students said, "What kind of strange patata do I have here? A potato? What is this?" And it is an unfired object that is one of those spools that have been discussed very much in the recent decades. And of course, you know these spools very well from your excavation in Sissi. We still have to resolve the puzzle of who invented these spools. Are they a Minoan invention because they are so early in Crete? Or are they an Italian invention, but you didn't find them because they are in Italy, they seem to be unfired. So if you don't have such a good coincidence of embedding material that is totally different from the material of the thing itself, so that you can see it, otherwise you would think this is a piece of earth. So maybe they were not identified always. Okay, this is the ones you know, of course, but they are fired as far as I understand. So they are technologically different from ours. And finally that one, this is the most curious object that we found in the same ash level of late Helladic 3C early date. A tiny little figurine made of elephant ivory. Our zoologists looked at it and said, yes, it's elephant, it's not hippopotamus. It's a man with a breechcloth. We found it at the very top layer when we were still excavating with a pick, and of course you notice the modern break. We have sieved the earth twice and 3 times. We did not find the head. I think we did not chop off the head because the hand here, this hand has an ancient break and the foot have ancient break. I think we chopped off one of these splinters, and the thing was broken in antiquity, which would be in agreement with the other broken objects in that same layer. It's very naturalizing in style, and if you, that could be a reconstruction. We did not dare to put headgear or hairs. We can do different reconstruction. One of our students did the reconstruction, Nuncia Laura Sardalamacchia. She did also various tries with hairs and the head and so on. And stylistically, it comes close to, I think, to Neo-Palatial Crete, late Minoan 1B, like those things from Archanes, which are also approximately of the same size. A style that would, at the earliest, be beginning of Neo-Palatial period, which is, this one is of course of clay or of pottery. But the type of gesture is of course a very old one, which you know from the pre-Palatial period in terracotta. And note that the thumbs are always molded separately. In ours, in those early ones, and also in the Neo-Palatial ones, like the one from bronze, made of bronze from Katosimi. And if you look and try to find parallels made in ivory, there are in fact very few ones. There are 2 from Mycenae, there are some fragmentary pieces from Knossos, 2 small ones from Niroukhani, a very strange one from the Aegean on Samos, and of course the big one, I mean everybody knows here, especially because Jan Driesen is your professor, he will have shown it several times to you, I think. So I don't need to talk about that, I think, and neither about its fine place and the interpretation as a cult image. Then you have the fragmentary ones from Knossos. These are the small ones from Niroukhani in a late Minoan 3B context, but they are more stylized than ours. Of course, they are also not so well preserved because a lot of this is plastic. So this is ivory, and the head is ivory, this is ivory, but the arms are not, and the legs are not. This is the one from Mycenae, the male one. This is a female one from the same tube, but unfortunately these are from Zuntas excavations. So we don't have the real closed context. We can't date them by pottery. This is found together with it. More ivory, a seal with the same depiction, maybe a coincidence, but still it's the same standing male with the hands on his forefront. This is the second one from Mycenae. It was published as a woman, but it has no breasts, and it seems to have a very schematic rendering of this loincloth. And the women in ivory, the statuettes, always are wearing skirts. So I think it's a man, but with exaggerated thighs. And this may be a Mycenaean style, because also the other one from Mycenae has very thick thighs, not so slender as the Minoan ones. And this is a rich tomb, but again, no closed context, again, Zuntas excavation, but this miniature vessel seems to indicate the date in late Helladic 3A1. And then this is the one from Samos, also with thick thighs, but it's from an 8th century context. Niemeyer thinks that it's coming from the Minoan sanctuary, which he is excavating, but the context is younger. It has been compared by Kyrieleis to this one from Mycenae, stylistically, the face, and the gesture, the posture, and the cloth is Minoan. So maybe it is really a Bronze Age sculpture, but it's stylistically, of course, quite different from ours, but it's still the same type of representation. In Mycenae there are some ivories, but not of our type. And one is a very small sitting figurine. This is just demonstrating that you can have small ivory figurines in Mycenaean sanctuaries, perhaps positioned as a votive offering, because all this stuff was inside this bowl found in this back room of the sanctuary in the cult center. So either they are found in graves or they are found in sanctuaries. And what does it mean? It seems to be a gesture used by persons that are venerated. You do not find it in scenes with several figures as a gesture of adoration. Rather, these people are venerated here by mythical creatures, the Minoan genius, the winged goat, and here even the person is hovering in the air, and it's shown in full profile. So the fists are, you see both of the fists, the one from the right and the one from the left, and he is coming down like this. So, and he is greeted by this woman, so it should be a god descending from the sky. And the latest in time representation is the one on the famous linear B tablet from Mycenae. And again, the foot are pointing down, he even seems to be hovering. So the iconographic idea is preserved until the end of the palace period at least. But ours, I think, is stylistically considerably earlier. Now, ivory in Italian Bronze Age contexts is a really very, very rare thing. I don't show all of them, but there is none of clearly religious function. There is one head of a warrior from a footstool that we know from Mycenaean Greece and Minoan Crete, like these ones from Archanes, Fourni, and the one represented here on the famous gold ring from Tiryns. And then you have some local ivory working in Trinitapoli, Middle Bronze Age contexts, but representing local creations. Probably with symbolic value, but not reproducing religious ideology of the Aegean, just taking the material from there. You have no real figurative art in any great extent in southern Italy. You have very, very few Mycenaean pottery figurines, ceramic figurines at very few sites, which is in marked contrast to the ancient Near East, where you have lots of them. At each site you can find a dozen or more. So this is not something that the people in Italy would integrate into their ideological framework. In fact, also in the Italian pottery, you don't have depictions of anything. What the only thing you have, very, very rarely, is in the recent Bronze Age some crudely made terracotta figurines of other types. And the earliest one is from Middle Bronze Age. But so there is no real iconographic context into which you could insert a foreign typology. And moreover, ours is found in a context considerably younger than its production date. You know, if this is Neopalatial, it is 200, 300 years younger than its deposition around 1200. So why is that so? Did it arrive at the time of its production and remained in use or in storage in that region? Or was it brought together with the late Minoan pottery from Crete at that time? The one argument for an early import could be a tomb found like 5 kilometers from our site at Gallo di Briatico, a Middle Bronze Age tomb, jar burial. Unfortunately, the bones are lost. It was not an archaeological excavation, it was a recovery by private persons. And this contained a talismanic seal. And this would also go well together with the early Middle Bronze Age date, would be like Shaft Grave period, Neopalatial period. And that has a fragmentary silver bracelet, which we could analyze, and it is also containing silver from the Aegean, not from Laurium, but again from the Aegean, from one of the other deposits. Either Euboea or Thasos cannot be really pinpointed. And this rock crystal bead looks like those big ones that are on top of the needles of the shaft grave. So this might be also an import from Greece. So there is an early contact, and a seal is also nothing that you would export. So maybe there was a contact and there was a person like identifiable as the true contact persons for the Aegean people by the seal. So this could create a certain kind of milieu where you would think it could be possible that such a statuette, for whatever reason, found its way to the region. But it remains the other possibility that it came together with the rest of the stuff around 1200. And remember that at this time we have had before the collapse of the palatial system, or the tearing down of the palatial system, if you believe that there was a revolution in Greece, and you have had the sea peoples phenomenon going around. And remember that I couldn't explain all this weapon stuff, but you have an introduction of Italian type weapons at that time, and you have people making Italian pottery in Greece. And at the same time, the new weapons are introduced. So there is a kind of warlike contact between the two regions, because new weapons you introduce when you are forced to fight with those people who have the new weapons. And so you can think of a historical context when you have pirates going from the west to the east, and also migration and remigration. And in this kind of context, you probably could also explain why you have such a large amount of imported Aegean pottery. I mean, large amount for Italian, in Italian terms, of course. Whereas in all the other sites, or nearly all the other sites in Italy, you have just local imitations. But these people here got the real stuff. But maybe they didn't get it, maybe they took it. So, that's it. I mean, I think there may be a lot of questions. I myself have more questions than answers, but we are just at the beginning of our analysis of the finds. So thank you very much, and thank you for giving me the possibility to talk to you here.